And if you haven't heard Dean before, you will again understand that he is a libertarian. I love this. I love this. Dr. Stansel always sends me some articles from magazines and newspapers as conversation starters. And the title of this one is terrific. I'm one who doesn't have a lot of hopes for the Biden presidency. He's the shakiest looking dude I've ever seen. The title of this article from the National Review, which I have subscribed to off and on for many years, is "Make America Mediocre Again: Biden's Corporate Tax Agenda." Now, are higher taxes on corporations, do you believe, will that inevitably lead to mediocrity?
Well, I think it's more of the fact that when Trump took office, we had essentially the highest corporate income tax rate in the world. And thanks to the tax cut legislation that they got put into law, we were able to come down some and get to a more middle ground position. We're by no means the lowest, but we're more competitive now with the rest of, for example, this article, he looks at the G7 countries. And so we came down closer, basically to the G7 average. But part of Biden's corporate income tax increase plan would basically put us back where we started, and only France would be as high as us at that point. We'd be tied for worst. But yeah, that certainly, I think, pushes us in the wrong direction. And one of the things we talked about years ago was these corporate inversions with these companies moving out of the U.S. Because of the high tax burden here and going to other countries where it's lower, and the corporate tax cuts kind of reversed that flow and brought some of it back. So I think this would be a step in the wrong direction in that regard as well.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, most of the corporations have already abandoned the United States and went overseas for cheap labor. Then they want to come to us and say, send in the Marines if the sea lanes are threatened or if their property overseas is under threat. So you know who you're talking to here, Dean. So
no sympathy from you on that, right?
No.
Yeah. So sure. While the manufacturing has, in many cases, moved to places where labor is cheaper, the headquarters typically are still here in the U.S. And that's what we were seeing a few years ago with these headquarters actually moving, pulling up stakes. And so many of those came back. And I think, the problem is, Michael, that when we think about the corporate income tax, I think most people just instinctively think, okay, it's these big, rich, profitable corporations that are paying the money out of all this money they got just sitting around. But what actually happens is it's a combination of three. The corporations are writing the checks to pay the tax, but they've got to get their money from their customers in terms of the prices they charge for their products. But it also hits as well customers. It also hits their workers, right? So if you raise taxes on corporations, they have less money available to pay their workers. And in the case of those that are publicly held corporations, of course, their shareholders take a hit as well. And many Americans are shareholders now, not just the wealthy 1%ers.
I hate to be argumentative with you today, Dean. I really do. But I don't think the main purpose of corporations is to pay their people more. I think it's profit and profit for the investor class. And the real plan is to keep wages. The one thing they control, the one business expense they can control, because they can't control energy costs or taxes a lot of times, but they can sure control wages. Yeah, they'd like to keep those as slender as possible. That's the basic business plan of every corporation, including the one I'm working for. That's their business plan.
Well, that's right, but they are limited to some extent, Michael, of course, because it's a competitive market for labor. So if your employer tries to keep your wages excessively low, well, someone else will outbid them to pay you more fairly in a competitive market. Now, obviously, it's not a perfectly competitive market, and especially when labor is specialized. But it's the main point is that anytime you raise taxes on corporations, it's not so black and white that you're just hitting the 1%ers and making them give back more of the money that they have. And the burden is spread across. The research tends to show that the biggest part of the burden is actually borne by the workers who get lower pay than they would have otherwise if it weren't for all the tax costs.
All right, Dr. Dean Stanzel is our guest. He's an economist at Southern Methodist University and a libertarian, of course. Reason Magazine is one of my favorites. By the way, all these magazine articles that I referenced today, and again, our conversation starters from Dr. Stanzel, all these things will be on my Facebook page, which is at AM 1400 KVFD, the voice of Fort Dodge. California, one of my favorite states because it's always so crazy. California, in November, said no to rent control, which is kind of a surprise in California. They also said no to increased property taxes, diversity quotas in government and college admissions, and burdensome regulations on dialysis clinics. But they said yes to Proposition 22, which allows Uber and Lyft drivers to remain independent contractors, putting a hurt on state legislator attempts to control how these companies classify their workers. I think that is kind of a sleight of hand by Uber and Lyft. Oh, yes, you're an independent contractor. We'll just show up every now and then and take part of your money.
Well, I mean, listen, the drivers for these companies have one thing that they wouldn't have if California's AB5 had gotten its way, and that is the flexibility to work on their own schedule, right? To be basically their own boss. Now, for sure, part of the trade-off is that you're not a worker, a full-time worker with benefits and all that sort of thing. But it is a trade-off. People have deliberately chosen this as a side hustle, as a second source of income. And what the California legislature and their at least self-perceived wisdom had done was say, well, let's help these poor rideshare drivers. Let's help them by making them be full-time employees, which they didn't want to be in the first place. And it's another case where the politicians, the political class, thinks they know better than the rest of us. And the first couple of things you mentioned, I was surprised when I read this about all the things that California is legendary for, having all these citizens initiatives on the ballot, but all the things that the voters kind of voted no to, that yet nevertheless they keep electing politicians in California that like that sort of thing, like rent control and higher property taxes. So maybe the California voters are starting to kind of wake up and see the light, and see as they see all their fellow neighbors leaving for lower tax places like Arizona and Texas and Nevada.
Well, several years ago, this happened in San Francisco. Now, I don't know if rent control was a city idea or a state idea, but when rent control came very strongly to the city of San Francisco, a lot of the landlords painted all their buildings red, socialist red or communist red, they believed it. So wherever you went in San Francisco, you're going to run into some red buildings. And you always knew those were the ones. There were renters living in those buildings. Socialist red. Right? Like you would need to think that San Francisco wasn't socialist, for God's sake. or need to find out. Dr. Dean Stanzel. Right. Dean Stanzel is our guest. That's after that long list of things that make us think that the people of California would like to get some sort of hold on their government and restrict the nuttier influences of their really already nutty legislators and governor. For some reason, they want to. Maybe they want cheap rides. I don't know. Maybe they have a. I don't know. I guess I don't know. There was a poll result listed here that showed that 60% of the rideshare drivers were in favor of remaining independent contractors. So they were against what the state government had done previously, which seems a little low, honestly. But a vast majority of these guys are in favor of remaining with that flexibility. All right. If there's one thing that drives Dr. Stanzel nuts, it's the minimum wage. So naturally, we're going to talk about the minimum wage because a lot of states have raised the minimum wage. As is noted in the article, the wage rate of especially lower skilled jobs has pretty much stayed where it has been for years and years and years. It's the wages have been ground down pretty good in a lot of these states, especially right to work states like Iowa. We have a minimum wage, but it's $7.25. Who in the hell would work for that anyway? I don't know, maybe somebody would. But anyway, you're opposed to minimum wage on what grounds?
Absolutely. I'm opposed to it on the grounds that it doesn't help and it actually does harm to some of the very people it's trying to help. And and so sure, the federal minimum wage hasn't been increased in about 11 years now. But the point is that that's not mandating what employers have to pay, or what they can pay. I'm sorry. It's just saying they have to pay more than that. So the wage that entry level workers get has risen substantially above that in most places. It's just a question of do we want to use legislation on this that increases the cost of hiring low skilled workers, that thereby, because of that higher cost, means employers are going to hire fewer low skilled workers. And some of the ones they do hire and that are going to benefit from a higher wage when they raise these things to $15 all over the country are high school kids, college kids from wealthy families who are just doing a part-time job to earn spending money. Those guys aren't the type of people that I think most people have in mind when they say, oh, we need to raise minimum wage. They're not looking to increase the living standards of rich high school kids. But that is what the policy does. And so in an exchange, true low-skilled workers who really need the work find a harder time getting that first job. And so their real wage is zero, not $7.25 or $15. It's zero because they're shut out of the labor market. And we have better ways to help the type of people we're trying to help here. The earned income credit, the earned income tax credit, is a much better, because it's a much better way of helping them, because it's targeted at those who actually need help, right? It's means tested to only go to those with low incomes. And it would be a much better way to help those that the minimum wage advocates are trying to help.
Well, that the earned income credit, as I recall, was a creation of the Clinton administration. Now, I'm loath to give Bill Clinton any credit, but I believe that was his program. And do we still have that earned income tax credit? That was a target of the Republicans there for a while.
Oh yeah, that's still in place. And the issue is that certainly you can tinker with it to make it work better, but the point is that it doesn't help. It doesn't offer this kind of subsidy to high income workers like high school kids and college kids who are just out there spending money. It only goes to those who truly have low income and who truly need the help. So in that way, it's more targeted and therefore more effective.
Well, speaking of that, what do you think about this $2,000 gift from the government? I suppose you're not thrilled about that.
Speaking of targeted or lack thereof, yeah. So yeah, it remains to be seen whether that actually happens. But this article from this woman from Manhattan Institute in New York had an interesting proposal in there. And of course, the criticism is that just by giving a check to every single person in the country, you're offering these subsidies to people like me who haven't really missed a paycheck, right? Who aren't in financial hardship, who because of the nature of their job are able to work at home. But she had some interesting stats in here about essentially what has happened to a lot of people who haven't lost out is that savings. They've just been banking their money, and in part also banking, the checks the government keeps sending them. I think there was something in here about savings went up, it doubled over what it would normally be. Savings last year were $2.2 trillion, or nearly double the amount we normally save. We saw about $120 billion of credit card debt get paid down, which, that's a good thing. I'm not saying that these are bad things, but only trying to highlight the fact that there are plenty of people who really aren't struggling. And she also made an interesting point that the people at the very bottom really aren't the ones who've had the biggest harm done to them in this epidemic, because those guys with the unemployment bonuses that the federal government has given out have been able to hold the line in many cases. But it's the people in the middle, the business owners, the small business entrepreneurs, who basically lost their life savings. They had their life savings in this business that they loved, and all of a sudden they got no more customers because the government told them they've got to shut it down. And those guys kind of in that middle entrepreneurial category are the ones that are really in need of help. And she had a nice proposal here on how you can just base the assistance on looking at income on your income tax form, right? Comparing what people earned in 2020 to what they had earned, say, the average over the past 3 years. And you can then target it much better. And, this is not like hard to get information. The IRS has all these records, and it would have targeted it a lot better. It would have saved money. We spent trillions and trillions of dollars just flying helicopters around dropping money. We could have targeted on those who really needed it and saved a lot. Well, that money's got to get paid back at some point, right? I know that a lot of people think the deficit and the debt doesn't matter, but at some point it's a liability we have to pay back, and the interest on it gets bigger and bigger. So there are ways here that we could do this better, no doubt.
See, the debt and all that, that's the benefit of being older. I never have to worry about it. I'm never going to be around. I'm never going to be around to see it paid off. Not ever. Sure. Dr. Dean Stanzel is our guest, and he's an economist with Southern Methodist University. The idea of this, what do you call it, this $2,000 thing, the stimulus, that's what it is.
Right.
Is really to stimulate the people you're talking about. In other words, the small business owners. People will get this extra money and they'll go spend it. I remember after the first stimulus, which was like $1,200, the parking lot was full of Walmart, I think, and a lot of televisions were being bought that day. Now, I don't know if Walmart needs the money, but some of our local merchants probably do. Would you agree that this is a stimulus?
No, I really wouldn't, because the majority of people getting those checks aren't going to spend them. As I said, savings doubled last year. People saved $2 trillion. And so the other thing is that the people who need the money the most are the businesses that are shut down, that either have been shut down by government mandate or that have gone out of business entirely. And so while some people surely will take that check and go out and spend it, they can't spend it at the movie theater in most places, right? Because the movie theaters aren't allowed to open. They can't spend it at eating indoors at a restaurant in a lot of places because that stuff is outlawed. And so it's really a catch-22 in that the people who need the help the most are really not legally allowed to operate in some cases. And to me, that's the bigger part of the problem. And those are the people you need to target the assistance on so that they can make it through this pandemic and still have a viable business at the end of the road.
Well, some of the governors, especially in Michigan and Maine, they're tyrants, frankly. They have used the corona to just assume dictatorial powers. I mean, that woman up in Gretchen Whitmer or whatever her name is in Michigan, I don't know who keeps her in office or who would approve of the type of things that she's doing. It's ruining lives all over the state. And of course, I must do this in the name of what? Public safety. I love it when somebody starts talking public safety because I know we're about to get screwed. Anyway, Dr. Dean Stanzel is our guest. Thank you as always, Dean.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Michael.
All right. This is AM 1400 KVFD, the voice of Fort Dodge.
If you're a gearhead or not, you'll enjoy the Under the Hood Car Show every Saturday afternoon from 2 till 4 on the voice of Fort Dodge, AM 1400 KVFD.
Another White House departure. I'm Lisa Lacera, Fox News. Just over a week before Inauguration Day, and the acting head of Homeland Security has announced he's stepping down.
Chad Wolf, in a letter to department employees, says he is stepping aside for two primary reasons. One was a New York judge's ruling